Thank you so much for being here and coming on such a rainy day, even for the Netherlands standards. My name is Federico. I'm from Argentina, but I've been living in the Netherlands for a couple of years, and so far we're loving it. So anyway, I'm just going to get started with this talk. I've been working on my own front-end framework for a while now. Let's just say the last year I've been doing most of my open source efforts along this direction. And so yes, I'm going to be talking about this, and it's very nice to actually get it out there after so many hours of just coding on my own. You know, coding can be quite a solitary thing. So anyway, I'm going to get started, but this is not going to be probably the way you imagine it. Actually, first I was going to do like the talk saying, okay, this is the tool that I built, this is what the tool does, and here are the details of the implementation, and this is how it compares to other tools, and this is why you might like it or not like it. But I'm not going to do that. And part of the reason is that I found a very cool book this year that I highly recommend to all of you. It's called Start With Why. And the author, Simon Sinek, I think is his name, he basically makes a compelling argument saying that basically the best way to present an idea is not to talk about the idea or the product or whatever, but just first talk about the deep purpose behind the idea. Why you are doing that first, because that's the emotional core. That's the level at which we first relate to an idea. And then you move on to the how, which are the broader outlines of the idea and the fundamentals of it. And then finally you get into the what, which would be the nitty-gritty. And because I have 25 minutes, I think, I won't have any time for that, but you can definitely grill me later outside. No worries. So I started as a developer like 7 or 8 years ago. And to me, it was an amazing thing to be able to start coding and doing my own projects, also working with companies and just doing technology. I came from a political science background, so it was pretty hard for me at the beginning. So every day felt like a challenge, really. And over time, after maybe 1 year or 1 year and a half, I started noticing certain patterns that I would have struggles and I would put a lot of effort into it, different days. But I had two types of effort, or two types of days, let's just say. And these are the archetypes for those days. So here on the left, you might know him from, he did his Rocky Balboa just before he was about to win the Cold War. He was training in Siberia at the moment. And here you have Homer Simpson, when he's about to actually like save the city of Springfield from a nuclear meltdown. So you can both see they're both heroes, and they are both under a lot of stress. They're really trying their best. So some days I felt like Rocky, and some days I felt like Homer Simpson trying to save Springfield. So, and I started to notice patterns about this. So the days that I felt like Rocky, basically when I just jumped into the code task that I had, I just felt a lot of energy. Like saying, okay, I want to do this, this is what I'm going to do, I'm just tackling this. And also, whenever, you're all programmers, right? So you're just, things never go as you expect them to go, because there's some design things that you didn't think through, or there's some incompatibility between libraries that you have, or there's always something you didn't expect. So there's always challenges coming up to you. So whenever one of those challenges came up, which happens all the time, even every day, I would basically say, okay, this is a challenge, but this is my challenge. I accept it, I embrace it, this is going to make me stronger and better, and I just go with it. So the other days or other moments I had in my programming efforts, I felt like Homer Simpson here looking at maybe an Angular directive or something very complex. So when I jump into it, it's very hard. It's really hard, and I'm struggling with myself to actually make myself work and just keep on going with the progress. It's very hard. And also, whenever a challenge happens, same as before, I don't feel so much that the challenge is, I don't own the challenge. It's more like something external that happens to me, and I just have to endure it. So to make a long story short, I found out that it wasn't so much about the people I work with, it wasn't so much about the amount of windows I had in my office, and it wasn't so much about the amount of beers I had had the previous night. Basically, certain tools made me feel more like Rocky, where maybe I would have a very strong challenge, but I would still be able to get through with it, and I would get the energy. And other tools made me feel like I was Homer Simpson, and I really don't understand anything that's going on, and it's very hard for me to stay focused and moving forward. So it's a big difference. And And I think that the tools that really had this quality that I really liked were simple, but not easy. To give the best example I can give you is Node.js. Node.js, to me, is very simple. It has conceptual models that you can really and readily understand. And those conceptual models doesn't mean that it's easy. You still have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. You need to handle the callbacks. You need to understand what's going on at the operative system at some level. You need to understand about the files. You need to understand, thank you. Oh, that's brilliant. You need to understand about HTTPS and HTTP. You need to deal with a lot of stuff when you're doing a web server, right? But you can do still a lot of stuff. It's like a pull-up, you know? A pull-up is it's simple. You just lift your body with your arms. But if you have never done a pull-up in your life at the beginning, it's not easy. So these are the tools that really felt good. The ones that didn't feel that good were the complex ones. So basically, let me go back. When I was doing front ends back in 2013, all the tools that were available at the moment, and I could say like maybe the first version of Angular, Meteor, I was also starting to use Knockout, everything made me feel like I was Homer Simpson all the time. And I figured that for career purposes, this was not a good thing to feel. So what I did partly was to move into the backend and just use more Node.js, but I still wanted to do front ends. And I want to feel like Rocky when I was doing front ends, not like Homer. So that's why I basically ended up building my own thing. So that was a very long while. Let me see how we're doing with time. OK, we're good, I think. I'm quite accelerated. So let's move on to the how. I think I'm just going to keep my right hand here. Thank you so much.
I don't want to break your laptop.
No, it's my wife, no worries. So I'm moving on to the how. So I'm going to bore you. I'm going to get a little bit more technical now, but still not as boring as this might have been. So you should count yourself as lucky people. So the how. And the how wasn't, how can I build my own framework? No, not really. The how was, how can I write a web app without a framework? That was my question, because I really was burned out by my experiences with frameworks in 2013, 2014. So I said, why do we even need a framework? So I went just all anarchist, minimalist, whatever. So that's how I started. And before I get into it, I really was forced to ponder on a question, which is, what is a modern web app anyway? So, and actually, what's the distinction between a web application and a web page? And it turns out there's a very simple but crucial distinction between a web page. Here you can see Hotmail. I don't know who is as old as me, but I used to use this stuff back in 1999. And this is the first email service, right? Before Gmail, we had this. It actually worked quite well for some. Sorry?
Yahoo was at the same time.
Really?
Yes.
Cool. Cool data. Luckily, I think I wasn't programming back then. Sorry about that. But let's say, so this was 1999, and this is now, right? So it's still the Outlook.com, which used to be Hotmail. So, of course, you have almost 20 years of design and progress in all the tools and whatever, and they look very different. But there's one essential difference between this, which was a web page, and this, which is a web application. And the big difference is basically Ajax or Ajax. So in a web application, the client, the browser, sends requests on the background to the server, gets some data, and then refreshes the page. In the old paradigm, and think before web applications, think 1999, think 2002, think Internet Explorer 5, you just basically, or Netscape, you just have a page, right? The page has links. So you just, when you get the page, the browser renders the page, and that's it. Then if you want to click on something, you click on something and the process starts anew. You go to another page. Or if you're filling a form, because you're creating your own Hotmail account, so basically you just fill the form and you click submit at the bottom. You submit a payload to the server, and the server tells you basically, OK, that's all good or not, whatever. Now go to another page. So back in the day, there was no concept of re-rendering pages, which after 2005 or so, when web applications started getting traction, you had the need to redo the page with client-side JavaScript. So this is the main difference. So this basically at least answers the most minimalist question, which is, why do you need something different now if we used to have just web pages back in the day? So this is the first reason for which you need something, because you have more complexity. This complexity, however, is justified because a web app has offline ability. If somebody remembers in Hotmail, when you were sending an email, right, you just took 5 or 10 minutes to send an email, whatever, and if you click submit and the internet would go down, which happened a lot back in the day, it wouldn't tell you, hey, the email couldn't be sent, please retry. The whole thing would crash, not crash, but you would get like a page not found error, and you could not go back either. You lost all the state. With a web app, and Gmail showed us the path here, you actually have offline ability. So I know this is pretty obvious, but because we take it for granted. It's only been 10 years since these things have come around, and these are the real underlying reasons for which it's so much harder to do things now. But it's at the same time, it's all the more rewarding. And at the same time, it's more efficient, especially when you're in mobile networks. When you're doing a web app, you just load the page once, and then you just retrieve data, and you redraw the view over and over, and there's no need to retrieve the whole page every time, which really helps for scaling, and especially it helps you when you're on a mobile device. So that's I started playing around with solutions, very horrible solutions. Really, you shouldn't do this, but for example, you have some server code, so I would hit a certain endpoint, and I would basically send a chunk of HTML through the wire. Somebody's saying yes, probably, you've been there. Okay, and then you say you have the client code doing an asynchronous request, and you just basically get this piece of HTML, and you just append it somewhere. This is absolutely horrible, because you have pieces of markup all over your web server. So it doesn't matter how minimalist you are, this is still unpalatable. So I had to move on into something better. So, of course, the first change that I did here was basically to say, OK, the server has no markup. That's the base rule, OK? So I'm just going to send some AJAX here. I'm just going to send an array. That's it. And then the client is going to receive an array with JSON, which is the way an API should work right now. So I'm just going to parse this data. I'm going to make it into an array that it was, deserialize it, and then I'm just going to basically, for each of these items, I'm going to append them to my table with the jQuery selector here, and I'm just going to, by hand, do the tags, right? Okay, this is very bad as well, for many reasons. I will get to that later. So I tried becoming smarter, and by smarter I mean like doing more sophisticated, stupid things. Like, for example, having a generic function to create tags on the fly, basically by concatenating pieces of strings. Like, hey, you just put the tag here, and then you put the class or whatever, and then you do these beautiful things, like, for example, quoting a quote. It's not nice, and it's definitely, it's very error-prone. And for example, here, I'm always assuming that the tags have to be closed. But actually, there's 14 or 16 tags that should not be closed. They're called void tags. Also, what happens if you don't have a class name? What happens with extra attributes? What happens with nested values? And what happens with things that you have to escape, the HTML entities? So don't try this at home. I mean, of course, go ahead and try it, but you'll know it doesn't take you far. So finally, I had one revelation after being in the swamp for a long while, which is object literals. Yes, finally. So I could use object literals, and object literal sounds very fancy, but just let me take the fancy right out of it. An object literal is either an array or an object. And by object, I mean an object with the curly braces. That's it. So I found out that it's actually very straightforward to represent HTML with object literals. So for example, we have a paragraph here, right? So you have the tag P, the hello inside, and then the P here outside. Can you see the mouse? Yeah. Excellent. So this is a quite straightforward representation, right? It's like, I don't think it can be done any simpler than this. You just have an array where the first item is actually the P, the tag itself, and then the last item is the contents, which in this case is a literal. That's it. Slightly more complicated example. We have attributes. It's the same thing. It's an array. The first element is a P, and then we have basically an object here with the key and the value. You can add more if you want, and if we wanted, we could add some contents as the third element. So this is how you can, this is one way of representing HTML, and you can also do CSS, but I'm not going to go into that now, but it's absolutely possible to represent markup, HTML and CSS, from within JavaScript just using object literals. And this is where it starts to get better, because HTML is not a programming language. There's no logic in HTML, but there is logic in the views. So by using object literals, you're not leaving JavaScript land. We are living inside the JavaScript file, which means we have the full power of JavaScript available. Sorry, I just actually started talking about the next slide. Sorry. Let's go back. This is a nested tag, okay? You have the div outside, and then so we have basically the div here, and then we just put an entire array within here. So I hope that's more or less clear. Sorry, I just got carried away. So what I wanted to say is you can represent nested tags here. But as I was saying before, if you want to put conditionals or you want to put iteration, which is something you need when you're creating dynamic markup on the client, you can just easily do it with code. You don't need anything else. For example, if cond is a Boolean here, I can either show the tag, the paragraph with a hello, or I can show nothing. An empty array represents nothing. So I can also do the same thing for a class. So I have a class here, and depending on the conditional, I can add the h2 class to it, or not put anything there. And this is the most powerful feature, basically, which is you can iterate. So you start with a table here, right? This is just an array with a table string here. And then you basically take some items. This probably comes from the server. And you just map the items. And you iterate them, and for each of them, you return something. Of course, here is super simple. We're just doing one row, one cell, and the item itself, which we assume is a string or a number, and that's it. But you can get more involved in this, and in this way, you actually can go quite far in the way you construct views dynamically in JavaScript. And there's no string concatenation, none of those ugly things. So basically, this is how it would work. It's the same thing as before. You just have some items here. You just do an AJAX call. Then you just get the data here. And then you create the object literal. And then you pass it to this magic function called make.html, which exists in real life. I can actually show you the library later if you want. And that's it. And we just append it to the thing. So this was, I don't know, 2 years ago. And I thought I was done, right? I'm free. I don't need a framework. I can do whatever I want. Not really. Not so fast. Let me show you a very simple application. I think we're doing good on time. Yeah, so let me show you the name of the application is Kliko. There's a joke in there for people that speak Dutch. So it's like a very simple shopping cart. And the idea of this is to show you, I mean, this is very simple, right? So we just basically fetch data from the server. It's not really a server. It's just hard-coded here. But I have some stuff over here in the shopping cart. So if I just look at design, because I really need to learn how to design stuff, as you can tell from the slides and this thing. So I'll just add something to the cart, and it's going to go there, right? I can also take this out, just add, for example, another number here. If I just hide this thing and then show it, this number should persist. It should also persist if I do a reload. So I can add something else, for example, another book here, and it should automatically add it in this row, update the amounts here, update the counters. Like, this is the way it should work. And just something useless, a movie with JSON. And then when I'm done, I'm just going to click checkout here, and it's going to take some information, basically the whole JSON with the cart. And it's going to send it to the server, and it's going to reset the cart. So any shopping cart you do in real life or anything interactive is going to be more complex than this. This is as simple as it gets, right? However, such a simple application has actually a lot of interactions that are non-trivial if you want to get it done right. So, for example, just to reload, right, to get data from the server, it affects everything. It affects both the left view and the right view. It affects the list of items and the list of things you have in the cart. You need to preserve a lot of the user state. In this case, it's both the filter and the amount of things you want in the cart if you haven't clicked on the Add to Cart thing yet. You have to keep the cart as it is as well. You cannot just delete the data. The filter also affects everything. It affects a counter, it affects the list, and it also has to preserve things that you're not showing. So if you add something to cart, you need to check whether the thing is in the cart or not. Of course, you need to read the box where you say how many items you're adding. You need to validate that as well. You need to, it also affects all the counts in the cart, and so forth. I'm not going to stop much on this, but it really takes a lot of effort to get this right with all the interactions you might have. And it's not just the interactions themselves. It's also the order in which the user actually goes through these interactions. There's a lot of possible side effects that can happen if you're doing this imperatively. So you can just write code like this, which I did, like reload, and then you have to update items and update the cart, change the filter, and also you need to get data from the DOM, which gets very ugly very quickly, because you have data all over the place. You have the numbers on the card, maybe they're stored in the DOM, right? Like that's the old school jQuery way of doing it. So or you have the filter value in the input field, and you need to get it from there. That's where it lives, right? So it became very ugly very quickly. You have to write all this code for such a simple application, right? So like for example, to update the card, you have to do all of these things. Go, iterate, DOM, elements, hide, update, remove, add, conditionally, right? It's a mess, and it gets worse. So this is the core thing I want you to take away from this part, which is every new feature that you add to this application, if you're writing it imperatively, has to accommodate and be accommodated by the other features. Because in any view, you will have a lot of these interactions. So this is basically means that for every new feature you add, it's not an amount of effort that stays the same. It's not that the first feature cost me 5 hours and the second feature cost me 5 hours. It's more like the first thing cost me 5, the second cost me 7, the third cost me 11, and then it grows. The more features you add, the faster this grow. The complexity and the time and the possibility for bugs grow. So this is a problem. This is unacceptable. So basically, I had a last resort. OK, I was desperate because I really want to use a framework. So I'm just going to say, OK, I'm going to have a store in JavaScript, which was actually a good idea, and it's actually what React does. I just have one object that I call store. And I'm going to put everything there, the stuff that I get from the server and the state from the user himself, like the filters or the add to cart. All the relevant information has to be inside this store. This actually ended up to be a good idea. And then what I did was, for example, I'm writing this input, which would be the filter. So I said on input, when the filter changes, I'm just going to set store that filter to the value of the filter. And I'm just going to call this magic function called redraw. And what redraw does is basically throw an atomic bomb on the area that I'm redrawing and just redo the whole thing again. This is like the nuclear option. It works. It's consistent. You don't actually have to track the dependencies because you do everything anew each time. But of course, you know, this is not a good idea. And this is for two reasons. Number one, performance. Because if you're in this phone, it definitely is going to take a long while to redo a complex view. And number two is that there's actually quite a few stateful things in the app that you cannot capture within JavaScript. For example, certain dropdowns, the position of the dropdowns, it's very hard or impossible to know where the user left them, or the scroll as well, if you're in a long page. So throwing a nuclear bomb every time you touch something is not an option, and I learned that the hard way. So where are we now? OK. So anyway, after Atomic Bomb, I basically was trying to picture it in my mind, how this should be organized. And I want a magic view function that I'm just going to pass like the target, I should say, the place where I want to retrieve the information from. In this case, I put it in green, which would be like the items. Would be the items that I get from the server to list in my shopping cart. And then I'm just going to get the items. I just put them in yellow. And the same thing. I also want to make another view inside the other one that takes into account the filter, right? I want to see the state of the filter. The filter determines whether I show something or I hide something. So I just take the filter here. And here, I basically go through the items. And if the item matches the filter, then I returned a cell with the item. Otherwise, I don't return squat, which means nothing is going to be shown for that item. And that's it. This is what I wanted. I was like dreaming about this. But how the hell we do this? So events are a very natural way of expressing this. So basically, I will tell you how we connect these two, and then we are done. So here, think of events. For example, I'm just updating the name of a product, right? So I'm just going to set, in red, I put observe. And in green, I will put what's called a path. It should be a target, but it's the path. And think of REST for a minute. we have verbs, which are get, post, put, delete. They have very clear semantics, right? But just let's think a little bit more broad. So you have the verbs in REST, and you also have the paths. Like I'm going to get /API/items, for example. Or I'm just going to do a post to /API/card/to, whatever. So this is an extension of the concept of REST. So I'm setting a filter to the value kitties, or I'm setting items to this whole thing, or I'm adding an item to I'm adding an item to items, or I'm removing the first item. So this is the big three. You have a verb, you have paths, and you have an argument. So here I just want to show you that the path can actually be nested. This would be like something like /items/0/title. So you can actually update something within a nested object. You don't have to do the whole thing anew. And here I did these views that have no verb, right? Because there's nothing in red. I just say the path is items, and this is what I get. What happens here is that I basically create a hidden verb called change. So whenever you add, set, or remove, not only you are modifying this global store we spoke about, we also trigger this change event. And the views implicitly work with this change event. So whenever the relevant part of the store changes, the view is going to be notified and said, OK, I'm just returning you again what the view should be. So the view doesn't care how the thing was before. It just lives for the day and says, this is how the data is now. OK, this is what you should display. That's it. And I don't do anything else. And this works. So this is how I actually put together my framework. I use the object literals for templating. I used events with a verb plus a path. And then I just have a global store that is updated by the events. And then a view is just a function of the store, which is triggered by a relevant event. And that's it. And I've been creating intermediate level complexity applications in this way, and it actually scales, at least conceptually. Like I can add a new feature, and I don't have to be working around all the other features trying to make it work in the old imperative way. So this is the name of the library. It's called Gatov. And so, of course, if you want to talk about it, just ask about it later. It's open source. It's in GitHub. Feel free to take a look. And I have a couple of questions for you, but I think there's not enough time. No, I think I'll just move on. There's no time for questions either, but you can ask me later. And I really wanted to thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you so much.